Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And we have a wonderful presentation for it's our ARMA only member webinar series. And we really appreciate you guys taking your time today to learn a little bit more about values-based information management policies. Thank you so much for being here. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Today's recording is being recorded, so just letting you know. And then also, our presenter today is Louis Eisen. He is a fantastic member of ARMA who is here to help teach you as fellow coworkers and colleagues in our community. So Louis, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Hi, we ready to go ahead?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hello, everybody. Can I start with a poll, I think? And what I'd like you to do is reach for your chat and go and just adjust the two lines. So it says, instead of two hosts and panelists, you're going to do it to everybody so we can all follow what's going on. And I'd like you, if you could, to answer this question. That is not on the screen. There we go. How would the other people in your organization talk about your records? So you could just put a simple number from 0 to 5 into the chat, just so we can see where people are. Okay, I'm going. I saw seeing 1s, 2s, 4s. If anybody's a 5, you're welcome to teach this with me. Got some 4s. Okay. 3s, good. Okay, we've got a good range there. Okay. All right, let me pose the next one, which is, what would you like that number to be? Yeah, you know, we need to have policies, but we want people to follow them cheerfully because they believe the policy is right, not begrudgingly. We don't want them hating us for us. I'm Louis Eisen, as you heard, and welcome to this talk on value-based IM policies. Let me tell you why I got into this field. I was working for our Government of Canada department, and I headed the Consolidated Records Group. And when I arrived, a bunch of managers reporting to me came up and said, we have a terrible problem. Nobody is following our policies. We've written all these guidelines. We've got pushing them out. Nobody cares. Why are we even doing this? We're wasting our time. So I took a look at the policies, and they were full of, lots of bold and italics and underline and sentences in all caps with exclamation marks. And I realized that policies have a tone of voice. Policies are part of a conversation. And what had happened is that the conversation had deteriorated into us versus them. It had deteriorated into a confrontational discourse instead of being a collaborative one. The question really is, how do we make policies helpful rather than obstacles? How do we get people not just to follow them, but to rally behind them? So for the last while, I've been training policy writers on how to word their policies so that they will get some engagement. So let me show you a typical example. Pull this one up here. And I'm going to appear just so I don't disappear completely. There we go. That's me. Yeah. Thank you again for the literary award. That was great. Take a look. I pulled this off a site from a real government. This is very typical of the way IM policies tend to be worded. So I'm working generally on correcting two things. First is the tone of voice the language you use, or try and get rid of the heavy language like it's prohibited and you must and is not tolerated and all that kind of heavy language. And the second thing that I do is try and connect it to the values, make sure the values are clear in the policy. So you'll find for the first one, in terms of the language I use, you'll see that all these policies that I'm talking about are really worded very positively. They're worded not don't do the negative, but do the positive. And they tend to start with the word we. because policies are about how we operate here. It's not just what I want you to do. So that's the wording you'll find. How do we turn a policy like this into something that people will embrace? Let's start first with, what do I mean when I say policy? So this is the typical office manual that people had. The office manual is the document that helps people do their job. It tells them everything they need to know to get the job done, and that's all the information management stuff too. Now, office manual doesn't look like a set of binders anymore. More typically, it looks like this, but it's still the same thing. Sometimes it hasn't been restructured from the document model into the web model, but basically this is everything people need to know. There are 5 sources of information for the office manual, 4 written and 1 oral. And the 4 written sources conveniently divide into the decisions made outside your organization and the decisions made inside. So first are the external authorities, the Privacy Act, the Access to Information Act, whatever you are required to follow, whatever legislation, you need to inform people of that legislation. That serves as a source for what you have in the office manual. So I'm getting something, the screen might be blurry. Is that, how many people are finding it blurry? Okay, well, we're going to need to fix that.
Yeah, I think quite a few people are. There's several people have their hands raised as well about that.
Yes, I see. Okay. All right, well, that is no good. So I think what I'm going to do is just go live, go off my other cam and go right to the share the slide window. Okay, so give me half a moment. I'm going to go, there's my cam. Should be a switch over, and how's that?
Very good. I see you.
And do you see the?
Yep, and it's not blurring anymore. See the screen better.
Wonderful, good to know. Okay, thank you everybody for bringing up to my attention. Good. Okay, so can I assume though you still got this point about the office manual and the moving into the computer, moving into the computer view? So there are 4 sources. I said the first source, the set of decisions made outside your external authorities, the stuff that you need to tell people about that is imposed upon you by legislation. The second source of information are the decisions made inside your organization about where your organization is going. What are your plans? What are your strategies? What have you decided to standardize nationally? What have you decided to make local? All the business plans, those serve as a source of information. The third one is the actual policies, standards, and procedures, and sometimes forms. Those are the official documents indicating the decisions that your organization has made. The fourth one are outside sources that set limits on you. So for instance, you may not be able to use certain characters in your file name. That limitation means that you've got to tell people you can use this, you can't use this, but that doesn't come from you. That just gets fed directly into your manual. The fifth source of information is you, the professionals. You take all these 4 sources, you mix them together, you tell people what they need to know, you give them advice, you make recommendations, you give them examples, you do all the kinds of guidance, that everything goes into the office manual. Now, this particular one, as you see, is about baking cookies. So I hope most of you have your cookie baking policies in order. But I figure this was a good general one that people could relate to. So when I'm talking about policies, I'm talking about how do you word these statements down here. So I know in a number of organizations, people have turned the policy into the office manual. So they're putting everything, the examples, the illustrations, the guidance, the text, they repeat, the ledger, put everything into the policy. But when I'm talking about policy here, I'm actually talking true policy statements. The decisions made in the organization about the way people should operate. How do we word those? Okay. Is that clear? Can I get a clear from on the chat, just to make sure that what I'm saying is as clear as the image now? Oh, thank you very much, Leslie, Donna. Oh, good. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Now, if I can move on here, I'm going to show you an example of policy done right. When I had to make the Kindle version of my book, I had to follow certain rules because a number of Kindle devices are monochrome and they can't show all the colors. So where in the book it's black with very sort of burgundy, bright burgundy text to show examples, I couldn't do that. So Kindle could have done it wrong. They didn't. They did it very well. But I'm going to show you wrong first. They could have done this wrong by giving me a policy that looked something like this. And had they done that, I would have asked the same two questions you probably would ask if you had saw that. First is, really, couldn't you find 5 uglier colors than that? Really, is that the best you can do? And the second is, why are you restricting me in this way? Like, I'm the designer, or I'm putting this book together. I know what's aesthetic. Why are you restricting me? But they didn't do that. They did it very cleverly. They put this policy out there. In choosing colors for books, we conform to W3C recommendations for contrast. Well, of course I can back that up. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Can you tell me what value they're appealing to when they post a policy like that? Inclusion, agreed? Other ways we might word that, creativity. I don't think they're kidding. I think they're turning against creativity here. Accessibility, Emily, I think that's it. I think it's usability, accessibility, and therefore bounded by inclusion. That's the value that this is about. That's the source of this. And I buy into that. So then my question is, well, okay, yes, I'd like to choose the right colors. So how do I do that? And then they gave me a formula. And it's a very technical formula. And I fiddled with it for a while. And I said, do you know what would be really good is if I had some examples of colors that I could use. And then I get this. And now it's wonderful. It's not an obstacle. This hierarchy can be laid down on a sheet. So this sheet here shows you a breakdown of 3 types of documents. The foundational ones, these are all the internal documents. Foundational ones that your organization puts together, they're the values and principles and strategies to a certain degree. Your authorities, those are the policy, standards, and procedures that need to be approved formally. And then everything else that you need to tell people, guidance, the rest of the office manual, everything else, all the examples and everything that you're going to show them. So we could lay them down. So in this case, the first value that people are, the first value that we think people are trying to promote here was accessibility or usability. Underneath the value, there's a principle. And the principle weighs 2 values. So the principle says, if we have a conflict, this value will be more valued than that. And in order to figure out what the other value is, you need to ask yourself, what's the objection? Somebody who doesn't want to follow the rule, what are they going to object? And what value does that objection represent? So if I objected in this case, say to the rule from Kindle by saying, these colors are ugly, I can choose much nicer colors. Then we have a principle that we need to operate under, which is accessibility trumps aesthetics. Usability trumps aesthetics. That's our principle. And from that, we can produce the policy statement that says our policy is we use W3C standards. And under that, we can use the standard and the the standards and the procedures. Now, I'm going to, I need to be able to work here. So I'm going to be able to make sure this stays clear. Can you still see that? No. Let's share it again.
We only see you at this point.
Yeah, I know, as nice as that is, I really want to show you this. There we go. Okay. Can you see their accessibility, usability? That's how that maps into that chart. We start with the values of the organization. And from the values, we can deduct principles. And you see, even if you spell aesthetics the fancy way, it still doesn't trump usability. Usability is still important. And from there, you pull your policy and underneath the standard. If somebody came to you and objected to the value, if they said, I don't believe in usability, I don't believe in accessibility, I think the answer is, maybe you're not working in the right place. Like, this organization is all about accessibility and usability. You may be the wrong, maybe this place isn't right for you. If they came and they said, well, I believe in accessibility, but I don't think usability should trump aesthetics. Now we can at least have a discussion of values, and we can have an adult discussion about it. So somebody up top needs to be able to say, needs to make a decision that says, yeah, you know what? Accessibility is more important to us than some of the other stuff. I'm going to show you some more examples of this. Very often, we know where we want to take the organization. And because we're experts, we want the organization starting here, we want to take it to there. And we know that in order to go get that route, because we know what we're doing, we know you need to go straight, turn right, turn left, and left. So we write a policy that says you must go straight, turn right, turn left, turn left. And we wonder why people don't back it, why people think it's a problem. The fact is that in most cases, the values are so obvious to us because they are in our background. They are opaque to everyone else. And this just isn't an IM problem. I'm going to show you a bit later. I teach HR people and finance people. They have the same thing. The values that are so transparent to them that they couldn't understand why everybody wouldn't see it are opaque to the rest of us. So you need to be able to make the connection directly, obviously. Okay, let me go, and I'm going to share again. What a difference between a policy on the right and the policy on the left. People can look at the one on the right and say, yeah, you know what? What a great policy. I'm glad my organization has that policy. Any questions about sort of that approach so far? I'm going to give you some more examples, but anything off the top? Okay. Take this one. That is a very common IM policy. Now let's see if we can't map it to the same chart. What's the value that preserves? I'm going to go back here. What value is that supposed to be preserving? It's not as obvious as it seems. So a number of you are saying privacy. I mean, the respect for privacy, yes, I guess is a value, and certainly it's the topic of this. But I think this is more important about than just the respect for privacy. It's deeper. That is, why do we care that we show people that we have respect for privacy? Why is this something we need to spend time on? That I don't think it's about awareness, compliance. No, I think this is a value that's Dina, you're getting closer, but I still think it's more of a value. Lisa, you're also getting closer. yeah, it's more along the lines of integrity. I think what this is, reputation, yes, it's along that line. I think this value here is trustworthiness. It's important to us to look trustworthy so that people will feel comfortable in leaving their information with us. They need to be able to trust that. So there's a value here of, the topic is privacy, but trustworthiness is the main value. So the main value that we're trying to protect here. It isn't just trustworthiness and privacy, though. There's a strategy at play. Because if all we cared about was trustworthiness and privacy, we might say, well, you know what? Let's just go ahead with this app. And if there's a privacy breach, fine, you know what? We'll clean it up. We don't do that. So there's a strategy embedded in this particular statement about prevention. There's something about the value of prevention. So in order to be trustworthy, in order to get people's trust and generate goodwill, Angel, fair enough, and show our integrity, in order to do that, we need to, and we just left me, we need to put in preventative measures. So I believe, you see, if anyone is working on an app and they look on that, they're going to look at that and say, this is an obstacle to me getting my work done. We have to show them that this is not an obstacle. This is a part to getting your work done. I believe our policy really is that we take steps to prevent privacy breaches in new apps before they happen. That's our policy. And if people say, yes, that's a good idea, I think we should do that. How? Well, you have a procedure for it. A privacy impact assessment basically is a procedure. So you have a procedure that they can follow to make sure that they conform to taking steps to prevent the breaches before they happen. That's the statement of policy that you want them to buy into. Somebody mentioned compliance earlier. Compliance, there's a couple things, problem with that. Compliance is not a value for most people. So if we are talking about values that they don't relate to, we're not going to get anywhere. For most people, compliance isn't a value. Compliance, though, I think is a strategy. Again, it's a methodology to show another value. And somebody did mention that value earlier. It's in that list of things on the chat. Any thought? What is compliance evidence of? So yeah, it is evidence that we're following the laws, that we filled our obligation, but those again are methodologies. Those are not values. Accountability, closer. Yes, it's evidence of our accountability. I think it's evidence of our integrity. The value, thank you, Meg, the value is integrity. Integrity is about doing things by the book. We do our work and we are honest and transparent and we do things by the book. We're not crooked. We don't break the laws. We don't break the rules. That's what integrity is about. And most people at the top, if you tell them this is about your integrity, you want to be able to stand up and say you did this by the book without breaking the rules. Well, then you need, in order to do that, you need this sort of methodology of compliance. If you're going to say I did it by the book, you're going to have to comply with the book. It's so obvious to us that when we get trained, these strategies we're told, things like this is about accountability and legal obligations and reputation, etc. But we really haven't taken the time to articulate it in a way that somebody will say, yes, that value applies to me. I support that value. And again, if somebody came to you and said, you know what, I don't believe in prevention. I don't think we should be doing that. Okay, well, again, at the value level, your answer probably is, I'm not sure this is the right place for you. If they said, well, listen, I do believe in prevention, but we have a lot of things going. If we can't put a preventative measure, it shouldn't slow us down. That's their argument. They want to go quickly here. Somebody needs to make a decision that says, well, prevention outweighs speed. Preventing problems or preventing privacy breaches specifically is more important than speed to production. Okay, does that starting to make sense? I'm going to show you some more examples. They're not easy. You can give me a yes. Good. All right. At least if I get one yes that it makes sense, I'm going to assume there's one yes and 89 no's, but that's right. I'm going to go with the good ones. Okay, good. All right, let me show you another example now. Here is another policy that's very typical of the way that IAM policies come out. This one was also done in the must format, and there's no value associated here. We don't know what the value is. Now, I'll ask you again, and it's again, I think a lot of cases we haven't thought about it. What's the value here? Why do we have this policy? What value are we protecting? Yeah, findability, I like. Searchability. Oh, Cheryl, thank you so much for saying that. I needed somebody to walk into the trap. Oh, thank you. Standardization. Thank you. As a value. It is possible for some of these items to be values or strategies, but it depends on the situation. So, you know that Detective Monk on TV, he's obsessive compulsive, and everything he does is, well, he solves all his cases because he sees the finest details that everyone else misses because they're not obsessive compulsive. Now, it might be that we in IAM are obsessive compulsive, but the thing for Monk is that if there were 8 glasses of water on the table, every glass needs to be filled to the same amount. It doesn't matter whether the amount is good or bad, they all have to be the same. Standardization itself is a value for Monk. Maybe in Russia, comrade, maybe standardization is a value in a communist area because everybody must have the same thing. But that's not IAM. We don't standardize just because we think it's important that we all have the same thing. We standardize as a strategy to achieve those other things, to achieve reliability, to achieve consistency, to achieve clarity. So for us, in this case, standardization is a methodology. And that's an important distinction because the value other people are going to buy into is searchability, findability, reliability, clarity. That value they will buy into. Standardization as a methodology, not so much. It's not so clear. Under this the standard, here's the way I think this one lays down. Yes, David, Y2K was one of the reasons that international standard came out that way. So I think those are the values that we're looking at. No one said interoperability. And for me, I think interoperability is a huge value. That is, we have things and whether they're good or bad, they all need to interoperate. That's to me, so that's a value as opposed to a strategy. If somebody objects, how are they going to object? They're going to say, well, that's not the way I do it. I don't like doing it that way. My boss says I don't have to. So that value that they're trying to protect is preference, individuality, if you like, creativity. So we need a principle that not only is ease of use and accuracy of value, but consistency of value, but consistency is going to trump individual preference. That needs to be a principle from the organization. And from those two, we can produce a policy statement that says we consistently use a single date format across the organization. Again, are people going to rally behind that? Now, they might fight with you with what the standard is, whether they like this standard or they want MMDDYY, whatever. But the policy itself, the closer, more you can go down, the more accepting they are. The more likely people will buy in, especially at the higher levels, because you're buying into the part of their mandate too. Their mandate needs to be about accuracy and interoperability and ease of use. Every once in a while, we have an IM value that's important to us that does not resonate with anyone else in the organization. That's a problem. In other words, we care about something, but no one else has a mandate to do that. Nobody else has a value to protect. Sorry, has a mandate to protect that value. So that is a real conflict that we can't solve by sweet wording the policy. I'm going to show you an example that I use with HR. So here we're on the other side of the table now. We're the people that this applies to. Now I'm saying to HR, people say, nobody's following this, nobody's listening to us, nobody's buying into this. And we have to, the challenge is, how do we word this past presentation stuff so that people will buy in, that people will support it? When most of us look at this, certainly when I look at this, the thing that jumps out at me is, my God, these people are control freaks. Like, that's what this is about. It's about being a control freak. And that's not what it's about at all. But what it is really about is quite opaque. This actually is about safety, I think. So, and again, the same way I have to dig with you on the IM ones, I have to dig with the HR people on the HR ones. This is about safety. And the objection for someone saying, well, I think we should be able to swap, to trade passes, that's an objection for convenience. That if I follow your safety rule, it's very inconvenient. So we need to have a principle that says safety trumps convenience. From then, I think there is a policy that basically says, our policy, oops, that's not the one I want. Oh, it's not there. Sorry, all right. Our policy, sorry about that. Our policy says, we will take responsibility for the safety of anyone we know is in the building. That's our policy. And of course, people are going to rally behind that. Yes, absolutely. You should be taking responsibility for the safety of people you know are in the building. How do we do that? How do we know who's in the building? All right, now we can trace it down to a procedure. But again, we start right at the value. This is a safety policy. Let me go to that other one. I give you the date one. Yeah, the metadata one. Oh yeah, people hate using metadata. There's another typical metadata. What's the value we're preserving here? We're asking people to do this. Preservation is not a value. Preservation is a strategy to achieve something. I mean, I say that if you're an archaeologist, preservation is a value. And I suppose if you're maybe a historian, maybe even an archivist, preservation is a value. But for us, for active records, preservation is not in itself a value. It leads us to something. Yeah, I agree, Stephanie, the searchability, ease of finding things. I think that's one thing. So Andre, proper indexing is the methodology, but it's not the actual value. Proper indexing will lead us to searchability, will lead us to findability, and that's a value. Okay. Authenticity, okay. Responsiveness, yeah, agree. Assigning importance to the record. Stewardship. So stewardship to me, again, Pilar, unless I have a definition of it, I'm not sure where we mean, but to me, that's mostly a methodology. Again, it's, I will do certain things with this information, but it's not actually a value in itself. Maybe you mean, or maybe the value is something like full stewardship or careful stewardship or something, but stewardship in itself is a methodology. I think this is about accountability. Thank you, Lisa. I do think this is about accountability. And I think what we're saying is, to be accountable, we need to preserve enough of the context that we can understand the content. That's our strategy. Okay. This is about, we have a record and we want people to be accountable for it. And in order to be accountable, we need to give them a record with a context. So how do we preserve the context? That's just, again, procedure. This part is procedure. So when you raise your procedure up to the level and you make it a policy, it becomes opaque. We don't know what value it is we're trying to preserve. But if you said, no, our policy is to preserve enough of the context, that I think I did write that, we collect sufficient data around each document to provide context for interpretation. That's one way. Some of you talked about searchability. We could not collect sufficient data so that we can find documents by name, date, and whatever the last one was. Okay, so they have to trace their way up. Let me take you back to this. You see why this doesn't work? There's nothing to love about it. This is just a procedure. It says you need approval. Okay, you need to get approval. That's a procedure. Why? What value are we trying to protect here? I mean, it might be about reputation. It might be about competence. It might be about control. It might be about volume. It could be about a whole bunch of stuff. We don't know. Looking at this on its own, we have no idea what value or principle this policy is meant to support. Now, a number of you have organizations where you do have values that they've already identified. And I think the first task, if you're going to try and move towards this, is to see which of those values resonate in your work. Hopefully there are some. Very, very often there may not be, though. So I know, for instance, when I worked in government, we had all kinds of values about being client-facing and being responsive and being having integrity, etc. But there wasn't really a lot of value about personal responsibility, personal accountability at work. There was nothing in there about that. So very hard to hang some of our policies when the value isn't there. If you can't get the value at the top level because it's not there, my second recommendation then would be to get a values statement at the level, at the highest level you can. Can we put out an I am values statement? And it's not just about what I see mostly is a description of what makes information good, you know, current, up to date, correct, et cetera, et cetera. No, that's nice, but those are all sort of elements, attributes. What's the value that we are trying to, and for most of us, it may be integrity. It may be findability. It may be consistency, but we really need to identify that and identify the value that somebody else in the organization will resonate with. Very few people will resonate with the strategy of preservation. That doesn't touch them in any way. Okay, one question about this before I move on to my next point. Okay, one last point about when we look at this area in general, and this was the topic of my last blog in the magazine. So if you've read it, I apologize that for repeating this, but I think we are prone to making fundamental attribution errors when we analyze why people are not following our policies. So fundamental attribution error is an error in assigning motive. It's a psychological term. Somebody does something and we think we know why, but we make an error. That's a fundamental attribution error. And there's a number of these fundamental attribution errors. The most common one, or the easiest to understand, is the self-serving bias error. Self-serving bias error says when we do something well, it's because our skills are good. But if we don't do it well, our failure is because of something outside interfered. That's a self-serving bias area. And most of us do that. You know what? I just did this, I handled it, I did a great job, boy, am I good. Or I tried to do it, but, and you don't say, well, because I have no skills, but, and you've got all these things outside that interfere. That's an example of a bias error. The one that's relevant in this situation is actor-observer bias error. That is, it says our own actions are situational, others are caused by motivation. So when I can't hold the door open for somebody when I'm walking into a shopping mall, it's because they're too far, or I'm in a hurry, or there's something to do. I've got some practical reason why I can't stand there and hold the door open. But if they can't hold the door open for me, it's because they have no manners, because they weren't well brought up. That's actor-observer bias. When I'm driving slow on the road, it's because I am paying attention to the conditions of the highway. When somebody else does it, it's because they're a moron, or they're distracted, or they don't care. So that's actor-observer bias. When I ask people, why aren't they following the IM policies? Very often I hear things like, well, they don't care. They don't think it's important. A lot of stuff that we attribute to a motivation that we project. What's the psychological word? Transference. We project this motivation onto them based on what we see. But if I were asked to ask you, for instance, did you follow every single one of the finance ones? And why not? If you didn't, your answer might be something like, well, you know what, there's so many, I can't keep track of them all. There are, I've tried, I want to be doing this well, but I don't have time, I need this, etc. You have all kinds of situational reasons that you couldn't follow someone else's policies, not motivational ones. So I think we often tend to project motivation onto other people. But the way to bridge the gap is through the values. You may have heard me say this before, but people don't follow policies, people follow culture. Where the policy says turn right, but the culture in the office is to turn left, everybody will turn left. And what our job is to change the culture. We need to introduce, say, a culture of care, a culture of record keeping, a culture of accountability. We need strategies for that. And we need to identify the values that we want people to embrace, the values that we want them to accept. And that's what we have in common. Because our work with the operational line, we may not have a lot in common, but the values and the organization strategy, they must be in common. Somebody else here mentioned this about the governance and the mission. Absolutely. The mission, the mandate, the strategies, all of that. That's the stuff at the top of the organization. That should be in common between you and the other people in the organization. I'm really happy, and the number of people that have contributed. Feel free to throw out something in case you want to ask or challenge somebody. I mean, I see Roger, I'm actually interested in, if you could, you said distinction of account created using company's credentials versus personal. If you can expand on what you're saying there. Oh, what is this? What are you talking about? And David, talking to corporate governance absolutely has to be implied in corporate governance. Any thoughts about whether this approach would work in your organization? Thank you, Jan. I think the best question to ask you is, what value would you, if you had to hang your hat on a value that you want other people to support you, what value would that be? What would be your primary value? Respect. Okay, I like that. Integrity. Do you know there's I was teaching a workshop on policy, policy writing for one of the ARMA Calgary, and somebody stood up and said, we only have one policy in our organization, and it's the code of conduct. And it says we do things that respect each other, that treat each other properly, and listed a whole number of things. And that's our policy. And everything else falls under that. Very interesting approach. It's not a bad approach at all. I know there are a lot of organizations that wouldn't work for you. You'd have to be a very special organization, but they have basically hung all their policies on a value. Policy should always, thank you, Cheryl, should always align. Cheryl, you want to go to everyone and not just the hosts and panelists. So the policy should always align with corporate values. Trustworthiness. That's a really good one. A lot of trustworthiness, especially if we're government or we have like clients, if you're a bank, this is about being trustworthy. So how do we show people that we are worthy of having their trust? That's what it is. What are we doing? What policies can we put in place that will demonstrate we are worthy? Manage information to bring down the cost of information. Okay, so David, you're at NASA. There seems to be a gulf between their mission and your value. I'm sure there's a connection, but can you make it? Can you show me the tie? Angel, you said everything derives from respect for customers and each other. Most of us would like to work in an organization like that, I think, but there are a lot of organizations where their main value is speed. That's really their main value. People in and out, numbers, service. Let's just serve as many people as we can. That's really what we're all about. What do I contribute to more money and resources going to space? Okay. So can anyone, and Davis poses a very good question. So how do we connect David's values, what he does, to the mandate of the organization? Any thoughts? I got some too, but I didn't want to say it just in case anyone else had an idea. Yes, thank you, Cheryl. This is about accuracy. That where the wrong information, I seem to recall, can result in astronauts going off into the wrong section of space. So if you can find that kind of value that will hit both you and them, you need to hang almost everything you do needs to come down from the need to preserve accuracy. Because not being accurate will lead to accidents. You have to be able to make that tie. If you don't, if you can't make that tie between your I am work, people will just see you as a nuisance. You're doing things and you have another mandate. You have nothing actually to do. They'll look at you, I think, in some cases, I not to berate the cleaning staff, but people think of the cleaning staff as people that don't interact with their operations. They just go in and around them and they know they're there, but what the cleaning staff does has nothing to do with people's work. That's not the position we want to be in IAM. I really love some of these comments. Sustainability, Cheryl, is, well, I could say survival is a value. Okay, sustainability, I wondered if that was a strategy. Angel, you said doing things the right way avoids having to redo it. That's a nice strategy. What are you trying to protect? What value is that about? Because doing things the wrong way leads to learning. So what's the value we want to protect there? Business reputation. I think, again, what does your business, having a good business reputation gets you what? Does it get you long-term customers, loyalty? Does, like, having a good business reputation is how you build loyalty? Having a good business reputation is how you build, say, ongoing sales? Like, what's the connection? What is this value supported? Most of us know the strategies. We don't quite connect it up one. Values, wellness, growth, win-win relationships. You can see, okay, thanks, Tracy. Wellness and growth are really nice, but that's a bit of a stretch. You're going to have to make it. That's harder than integrity. So, you know, their values are wellness. Like work-life balance. That's really great. I'm glad the organization has a work-life balance value. But it doesn't mean, let's go out here, just because I have a work-life balance, that doesn't mean that I can tie my IM activities into that work-life balance. So if somebody were to ask, what does all this stuff you want me to do, what does it have to do with my mandate, which is, in the case of NASA, which is to fly to the moon? What does your retention schedule have to do with my flying to the moon? It's not obvious, and we need to correct it. Okay. Well, I'm really appreciative for all the, Josie, you'll need to go to public to everyone, not just to hosts and panelists. I really appreciate everybody participating here. You've got some really interesting thoughts. This would really be, I think, a good small group topic too, if when we were in a room and we could hash out some of these, because it's, you know, well, what are we, 129 people here? Kind of hard to have a full group discussion. Heather, did any questions come in from the Q&A?
Not into our Q&A box. No, they have not, at least not yet. So if you are contemplating a question, please make sure to put that either into the question and answer area or into the chat. We can take either one.
Did I miss any questions?
No, I've been trying to kind of keep through. I think you've gotten most of them. So.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, great job on keeping on that.
Yeah.
But a lot of really great information here today, a lot of really great points that I know that our members are going to be able to take back and utilize in their organizations. So love it.
Pilar, you talked about good value. Providing value is really, yeah, how does what we do relate to providing value? We need to make that connection. And that's an easy one to make, but we need to make it.
Okay. We do have a question that came in here. This member is asking, I'm having a hard time distinguishing from values and strategies.
So the values are, I would say, the ultimate point. That is, a value in and of itself is good. Integrity, most of us would say integrity is important in and of itself. In almost every situation, I mean, there may be exceptions, but I'm going to hold integrity above all. That's the value. A strategy is something that you only do because it's leading you to a value. So standardization is a strategy. I mean, again, unless you're a monk and you're OCD and everything has to be standard, it's just a way to get something. Preservation is a way to keep information to enable accountability. And that's the value that we want to support. There could be, so for Monk, if standardization is actually a value, he doesn't need a strategy for it. It's a value. But for most of us, it's not. Where we come into compliance is when we wave strategies around as if they're values. And the worst one is compliance. We wave compliance in people's face to say, you should be doing this because compliance is important. But compliance is a strategy. It's a strategy to achieve integrity or to achieve a number of things. For most people, compliance has no value to what they're doing. Certainly not one of the values of their end of the mandate. For most people. Does that answer that question?
Thank you. I think that's great.
Good.
And we also have another question that's come in. Can you give us an example of how to tie a couple specific values into IM policies for non-IM arms of an organization? So, for example, how do I help my engineers to understand IM values and purposes?
So you're going to have to understand the engineer's values. And that's very tough. It's when you deal with medical professionals, scientists, engineers, a lot of these professionals that really have a different set of values, that becomes very tough. But we're going to have to find some commonality with them if they're ever going to think that you're there to help them instead of impede them. I don't have an answer off the top of my head. And I think it would depend on the organization, but it's the right question to be asking. When you say, how do I get through to these engineers? Question is, what value do we share? I think that's what you need to be looking for.
Yeah, great. And then we have one more question. Where is the best place to find company values, corporate missions and visions, codes of conduct, those types of things?
Usually the corporation has a statement of values, but not always. And some of them are just sort of made flippantly, like they're values that they've stated because they think they sound good and people want to hear them, as opposed to they've actually thought through and thought, this really is about the way that we run our organization. Government, unfortunately, because it has so many mandates, has one of these, I mean, there are some values imposed on it, but values that it takes on that end up being inconsistent. And one of the values, somebody mentioned it earlier, properly spending public funds, being accountable for spending public funds responsibly, is a value that's imposed on them. But not many of them say that that's their mission, that's part of their operandi. Some do, but.
Yeah. And one last question we have in the chat here from Patricia. Are there any tools to help determine what the value really is?
I wish there were. And I think these are hard questions. Every time I stop and I look at some of these policies we have and I say, yes, I know I've told people this for years. Why? What was behind that? I mean, because we're so used to the methodology. Here are the steps, do this, do this, do this, do this, that we said, okay, well, wait a sec. This step is really to preserve this value there. It's hard. I wish it were something, and I end up bouncing them off my colleagues like you guys.
Great resources, yes. And I have another one that came into our questions area. How do I introduce a value that changes how a user does something that they've done the same way for a long time?
Innovation. There's another word for that, perpetual innovation or continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is a value, or innovation is a value. Novelty is a value. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is going to bring us to time. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Thank you, Louis, for such great content today. Kayla did mention in the chat that we will be sending out some follow-up emails on everything. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a wonderful rest of the day.